Whew, you sure gotta climb a lot of steps to get to this Capitol building here in Washington. Well, I wonder who that sad little scrap of paper is.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long wait while I'm sitting in committee. But I know I'll be a law someday. At least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
Gee, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law passed, so they called their local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." Then he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I'll sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I am still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm going to live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what happens?
Then I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all over again.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And if they vote for me on Capitol Hill, well, then I'm off to the White House where I'll wait in a line with a lot of other bills for the president to sign. And if he signs me, then I'll be a law. I hope and pray that he will. But today I am still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time you're so
By
old.
that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but how I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
He signed your bill. Now you're a law.
Oh, yes.
Hey, do you know about the USA? Do you know about the government? Can you tell me about the Constitution? Hey, learn about the USA. In 1787, I'm told our founding fathers did agree to write a list of principles for keeping people free. The USA was just starting out a whole brand new country, and so our people spelled it out, the things that we should be. And they put those principles down on paper and called it the Constitution. And it's been helping us run our country ever since then. The first part of the Constitution is called the Preamble and tells what those founding fathers set out to do. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare at hand, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. In 1787, I'm told our founding fathers all sat down and wrote a list of principles that's known the world around. The USA was just starting out a whole brand new country, and so our people spelled liberty. And the preamble goes like this. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. To ourselves and our posterity do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America, for the United States of America.
Wow, that certainly takes us back to the days when Congress actually passed bills into laws. We are excited to continue with our program today. Our next session will be led by Reverend Michael Neuroth, who heads the EAD Executive Committee. His full-time job is really with us, we think, but by day, he serves as policy advocate for international issues for the United Church of Christ, UCC, Justice and Local Church Ministries. He will introduce our special guests who have collaborated with EAD to develop our Lobby Day Ask. Michael?
Thank you, Jimmy, and hello, everyone. Jimmy, thanks to you and Maggie for being our cruise directors through EAD this year. I don't know about all of you, but I'm still resonating with so much of what Cliff Albright shared with us. Organizing is about how well you listen. I'm certainly going to take that and much else with me. And now I'm just a bill floating around in my head the rest of the day. And that certainly is a blast from the past for many of us. I know lots of us sparked early on interest in how Congress works and how we can be engaged. And although that video is a little bit outdated, there's a new one on YouTube if you want to look it up to see how things really happen today. Speaking of friends, this is the moment we've been waiting for, that time in our program when we begin to integrate all that we've heard so far, from Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner to Cliff Albright a little bit ago, as well as Bishop Marigza, Zena Hutchinson, and Martin Nates this morning, as well as all the great workshop content we've absorbed so far. We begin to focus in on our two legislative asks for our conference that we will be taking to Capitol Hill tomorrow. I want to begin by thanking colleagues who helped us discern and draft the asks for this year, including Thaddeus Elliott, Kate Epperly, Jason Miller, and Jose Was for the domestic ask, and Mary Kate Costello, Galen Fitzke, Nate Hostler, Becca Choate, Catherine Gordon, and others on the international ask. Thank you all for your work and efforts. The two asks, one on voting rights and another on human rights and arms control, would be transformative both here in the US and around the globe if they were to pass. Both, as you'll hear, face an uphill climb, but as people of faith, we believe there is always hope. Chains can break, a jubilee can come, a way can be made out of no way, and we are called to be God's hands and feet to make it happen. To introduce our asks this morning and this afternoon, and train us how to speak about them to congressional offices, we'll hear from two colleagues who are leading experts here in Washington on the issues, Jose Was and Jeff Abramson. I'm going to first introduce Jose, who will deliver the domestic ask, and then I'll introduce Jeff a little bit later. Our domestic ask today is the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, or H.R. 5746. Jose Was is the Director for Justice Reform at the Friends Committee on National Legislation. He leads FCNL's work on justice reform, election integrity, and policing, and helps to lead the Interfaith Criminal Justice Coalition here in Washington. Prior to joining FCNL, Jose was the policy fellow for the American Friends Service Committee, focusing on criminal justice reform, human rights, and peace-building research. Jose started his career in public policy, working in the U.S. Senate for Senator Robert Menendez, who interestingly is the sponsor for the Safeguard Act we'll hear about later. And that is where Jose built a robust understanding of public policy, the legislative process, and how to effectively communicate policy and politics to constituents. Jose Was, welcome to the virtual podium.
Thanks so much for having me. And I do want to preface this by saying that I'm pretty sick. So it's been a rough day, but I am very happy to be here with you all. This is a really important issue. I want to start off by saying that voting rights, democracy reform is every issue. It's polluters donating thousands, if not millions of dollars to influence the process of legislation. It's corporations donating to PACs and campaigns to stifle taxes that will have people and corporations pay their fair share, that can invest all over our country and our economy. It's corrections organizations and other companies dealing with mass incarceration paying to keep policies that incarcerate immigrants and promote the mass incarceration of Black and brown people across the country. Democracy and elections is everything. It is every issue. And it's important to view it as such because that's how we get a broad base of people engaged in fighting for our democracy, because we're only one generation away from losing it. We urge the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, H.R. 5746, to strengthen and protect our democracy. That's what I want you to remember. This ask should be how you open and close your meeting. It focuses the mind of the staffer at the top and the bottom after you make your points, justifying why they need to do your ask. You are one of the most powerful voices in Washington, the constituent. I'm a Quaker, and I work for Quakers. In our legislative statement, produced by the discernment of Quakers nationwide, it reads, "Our democracy can live up to its potential only if the government ensures open access to public office and electoral processes, curbs the influence of money and corporate power, safeguards the integrity of the voting process without raising unnecessary barriers, provides full participation for disenfranchised people, including those currently and formerly incarcerated, and protects and secures electoral and voting procedures from foreign and domestic interference, observing that district lines are too often drawn for partisan advantage. We encourage the establishment of nonpartisan processes for redistricting. We also believe that the Electoral College has outlived its original purpose and has come to distort democratic expression." So that comes from Quaker's legislative statement of policy, a document that we constantly go back to in the work that we do on Capitol Hill and advocating for justice. Put another way, we have a better system when we have a broad base of participants in our democracy with open access to the levers of power. We don't have that today. Laying that out is just as important as the ask. There are members of Congress and their staff who don't view there being a problem. One key example of this as part of the negotiation process to reform the Electoral Count Act of 1887, the relevant work group that's working on additional measures to potentially amend that piece of legislation when it's introduced, that work group is called the Voting Procedures Work Group. There's no mention of voting rights. Let me encapsulate the issue with an anecdote. In 2019, we saw the voting authorities in Randolph County, Georgia, close all but 2 polling locations. Randolph County is a majority Black rural county in Georgia. This is not a coincidence. The focus of voter suppression is often partisan, one party trying to get partisan advantage. But there's often a nexus with race and class. So the result is Black and brown people being disenfranchised, essentially being shut out of the process and not being able to vote. Felony disenfranchisement laws would closely follow laws that attempted to make vague activities like crimes of moral turpitude easy to cast a wide net over Black and brown people. And so with that, I just give you some pretty good examples that you can use when you go into offices, because the anatomy of a lobby visit, when you're in, well, you're not probably going to be in the office, probably going to be on Zoom, but the anatomy of lobbying really is, you have your ask, you have a little bit of small talk so that you can talk about where you're from because it's valuable. It connects you to the district or the state. And then you go into the problem. Like, this is a problem. Voter suppression is an issue. And then you can go into anecdotes and examples. And then you go towards the end, when you're closing your meeting, go back to the ask. So the ask is at the beginning and at the end. And I share these anecdotes and these examples because it's important to make the case, because when you're in your churches and your communities amongst your friends, sometimes it's obvious. The problems are obvious. We all agree that millions of people aren't allowed to vote every year. Poll closures happen all across the country, and they're sometimes mentioned as, oh, we're just trying to save money. We're just trying to be more efficient. No, you're keeping people out of the process. You're keeping people from voting. A circuit court in North Carolina struck down a voting rights law, and they said that it targeted racial minorities with almost surgical precision. So when you're talking amongst your friends and your churches, it can seem like these problems are obvious and we need to fix it. And let's just talk about the solutions. But no, you also have to talk about the problem, because there are plenty of offices and plenty of people in these offices that don't see the problem. And frankly, most of the time, it doesn't affect them. So it can be sometimes tough to see that there's a problem. And then there's the more nefarious case, which unfortunately is more and more the case these days. There are members of Congress and state legislators that benefit from the status quo and benefit from voter suppression. So this is why I'm here, very sick, because I really appreciate what you are doing in reaching out to your members of Congress, in trying to effectuate change, in trying to pass this bill to get us democracy reform so that we can get voting rights and so that we can do better as a country. And then I'll just mention a few things before I close. The Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act is a massive bill. It is over 740 pages. Why is this? It's because the problems and the issues are very complex. You can parachute into a district with $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $10 million, and you could blanket the airways with misleading political ads that harm a candidate who may have done a good thing that special interests disagree with. The average Senate race is around $11 million. So far, the Pennsylvania primaries, so far what's been raised is somewhere around $25 million just for, up until now, the primary. We haven't even gotten to the general election yet. That's how much that Senate race is costing. There have been governor's races. I remember, I think it was Jerry Brown, 2010. I can't remember the exact year, but that race was about $100 million. Regular people like you and me aren't cutting $5,000 checks, adding up to these $1 million sums. Obviously, these are people who have interests before these elected officials. So we need to have means of democratizing the process and making it more accessible to regular people. The Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act includes small donor financing for house races. So regular people like you and me can donate $10, $12, $50 and have it match 6-1. So that your voices can be elevated in this process. And it makes candidates who have good platforms, who might not appeal to the parties, to the entities with PACs making thousands of dollars of donations. So that's one element that I think is pretty important. That's part of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act. Like I mentioned in our legislative statement, state legislators draw congressional districts in a way that's very partisan, and it protects incumbency. So you, as a legislator, are picking your constituents as opposed to constituents picking your legislators. The Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act provides for redistricting commissions, and this will make the process a little more fair. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be more fair. There's elements in the bill that provide access to voting for individuals with disabilities. It promotes the ADA. It expands early voting. There are a number of states that have no early voting. You just are either going to vote by mail or you have one day. And there are states that do have early voting. The Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act establishes an early voting period to begin 15 calendar days from election day and to be held from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. It expands voting by mail, which was very popular among Republicans up until the pandemic, when it became popular for everyone. And then there were a number of legislators that tried to put restrictions on voting by mail because they liked it less, because a lot more people were using it and it was making it easier to vote. There's provisions that make it easier to vote by mail if you're a service member, if you're overseas. The bill also deals with, it prohibits interference with voter registration. It prevents election subversion. I'm just going through my notes because, again, like I said, this bill is pretty large because our problems are complex and pretty large. Another provision that I really like is, remember when I mentioned that anyone can parachute into a district or a state with a $1 million ad buy that they paid a super PAC to place in a state or a district? Well, the Disclose Act, which is a part of the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, requires that these organizations that fund $10,000 plus campaign buys, that they disclose their donors. So we'll see who's doing this, and they won't have as much benefit of anonymity. And this will make these ads more transparent, and people will know who's funding these ads and whether or not they're ad that they should pay attention to. So just in summary, there's issues with access to the ballot. There's issues with disenfranchisement. There's issues with access to even voting, like restrictions to the mail-in vote, restrictions to early voting. There's an excessive influence of money in politics, which means that people with the most money have the loudest voices in our system. And people with disabilities and Native Americans who might not have physical addresses like you or I, that might only have a P.O. box, they're being kept from voting as well. So there's a lot of different examples of people being kept from their right to vote that we need to correct. And that's why this this bill is so important, because it looks at all those different parts of the problem. And that's why I'm so thankful for you all advocating for this bill. And I just want to end, like I said, on the ask. We urge the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, H.R. 5746, to strengthen and protect our democracy. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Jose. As you've aptly described, there's a lot in this bill. And as there was some mention in the chat, there are documents that we generated, and Jose was part of that team. Two background documents, one on the domestic ask and one for the international ask, as well as a leave behind document that you will be leaving with the staffer following your meeting. And those are located on a tab in the lobby called Lobby Day Info Desk. And if you scroll to the bottom, those documents are there, and they're helpful, I think, for reference, and obviously to leave with the office that you meet with. Now we're going to turn our attention to the international ask. The international ask we're going to be advocating for this year is the Safeguard Act, or the Safeguarding Human Rights in Arms Export Act of 2021, which is S 1473 or HR 5629. Although there are lots of country-specific or other human rights bills that we could have supported, and some of those were mentioned this morning is in the international plenary, such as the Philippine Human Rights Act and the Palestinian Children and Families Act. The Ask team that drafted this year's materials felt strongly that we feel called to find a bill that addresses more than just one country, as well as one that addresses the issue of how U.S. arms sales directly and indirectly prop up repressive governments and ultimately undermine human rights around the world. While we'd love to see an end to unbridled U.S. militarism and all military sales, this bill does offer an achievable and an important step toward greater accountability. To tell us more about this bill, let me introduce to you one of DC's foremost experts on arms control, Jeff Abramson. Jeff is a senior fellow for conventional arms control and transfers at the Arms Control Association. He also directs the Forum on the Arms Trade, a global network of civil society experts that he helped found in 2015 to address the humanitarian, economic, and other implications of arms transfers, security assistance, and weapons use. Prior to rejoining the Arms Control Association full-time, Jeff managed the Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor and served as a policy advisor and director to the Secretariat of Control Arms, the global civil society alliance that championed the adoption of the Arms Trade Treaty. Jeff is also the former deputy director of the Arms Control Association and former managing editor of Arms Control Today. Jeff's work has been published in numerous journals, and he has been cited in major US and global media. Jeff, I've never said the word arms control so many times in one introduction, but we welcome you this afternoon, and please tell us more about the Safeguard Act.
Thanks so much. And it really is an honor and privilege to be here with you all. And I am super excited to talk with you and suggest how to communicate about this. As an outline of what I'm going to do, I'm going to sort of go through the big picture on the message I think is, and well as the U.S. role in the arms trade and how that relates to human rights, and then talk about what this legislation does. Luckily, my challenge isn't the same as Jose's. This is only 6 pages, not 700 something pages, but there's a lot of weeds, and I'll try not to get too far down into those, but I want to give you a feel for why we're excited about this. And a couple of reasons after that why now is the time for this, I would say, and then I'll just quickly do a recap. So turning to the big picture, if there's one thing I can encourage you to do, which is something that I can't do as well as you can, which is to make the moral argument. I, as a person who works on the arms trade for a while, am often asked the question or have to deal with arguments like if we don't sell weapons to a certain country, others will, so we should do so, or that there's a lot of jobs. But I always start with the moral argument that if it's wrong, and we shouldn't be doing it. And that we're not talking about bananas or t-shirts. We're talking about killing machines. And oftentimes the conversation comes around to, well, it's about money and in relationships. No, morally, we're talking about things used to kill people. If you, and however you say it, however you feel this, if you think it is selling weapons or providing weapons to countries where they're likely to be used for human rights abuses does not represent your values, it's not what you think the country should do, it's a stain on our conscience. Whatever this idea is in your words, if you share that with the people you meet with in Congress, that's, I think, the most important thing you can do. They need to hear that values matter and that they have constituents who think this matters and they want the United States to do better. So that's my big, very big picture advice and request. And it's something you can do much better than I can do. This matters in part because you probably all know, but it's not well understood, that the United States is by far the world's largest provider of weapons around the world. I'm going to give some figures. The figures aren't so important, but the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, which is SIPRI, has the best annual report every year. And they came out earlier this year. They look at 5-year trends. They look at major weapons, so not guns, but tanks and missiles and so forth. And in the last 5 years, the United States accounted for 39% of the provision of weapons to more than 100 countries around the world. This was up from 32% 5 years earlier. So the United States is the biggest and the growing provider of weapons around the world, including to a lot of countries where I think we have a lot of shared human rights concerns, a lot of weapons to the Middle East, but other countries as well that I think many of you have talked about as parts of the last 2 days. Russia is 19%. It's second, but that's less than half the United States. And Russia is actually in declining. Same with China, which is less than 5% and declining over the last 5 years. If people argue with you that the United States is in competition and it's losing, A, we don't want to be in this competition, but B, it's not true. The United States continues to sell weapons around the world, an increasing percentage of the weapons sold around the world. And this trend is probably going to continue. The trend towards militarism is unfortunately likely to continue, which we'll talk about later. But SIPRI just had their report out yesterday on global military spending. So this isn't just weapons, but everything that militaries do. For the first time, it's over $2 trillion worldwide. The United States is again the world's largest spender on the military, over $800 billion a year. So this picture of the United States as a key driver of militarism, of selling weapons, providing weapons around the world, is at the heart of the United States. And this is what this legislation is trying to get at. There's some other really interesting reports out there I'm just going to briefly mention. There's an Arms Sales Risk Index, which the Cato Institute has been doing for 5 years, continues to find that we send weapons to some of the most risky countries for human rights abuses and other risks. And the World Peace Foundation had a study out just last month that says the United States, if countries are at conflict, the United States continues to sell weapons to them. It's really up to the president. The other avenues we have to limit this aren't being pulled, they aren't being used, and we need to change that. So that's my big picture. And I wanted to start now to talk about what this legislation does. So as Jose did, it was very good, say what you're asking for, if you're meeting with the Senate, to pass S 1473. In the House, it's called 5629, the Safeguarding Human Rights in Arms Export Act of 2021. It also existed in the previous Congress as well, so this has been reintroduced. It's led in the Senate by Senator Menendez, who's the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is important, and I'll get to that at the end, and currently has 6 Democratic co-sponsors in the Senate. In the House, it's led by Representative Gregory Meeks of New York, who is the head of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and has 18 Democratic co-sponsors. This bill is a really interesting one in that it's super weedy. It's super technical. Any bill is, many people have their hands in it, but I think I know the person who's behind it, and that person has for decades been involved in trying to make the arms trade more responsible from the inside, seeing what the law is, how the law is not implemented the way we hope it will be, and what some fixes could be. I was watching the screen as the I'm Just a Bill was playing, and someone wrote a long entry in the chat about how, yeah, then there's the implementation phase. And I think one of the things that this bill gets at is having the United States implement law and improving law in ways that will be consistent with our value. So the first thing to, when you're talking with members of Congress of why you think this legislation needs to exist, is it does something very simple. It actually puts human rights considerations as a criteria when we make arms trade decisions. It's surprising, and many people on the Hill don't realize that something called the Arms Export Control Act, which is the most important, it's not the only, but it's the most important piece of legislation that talks about why we should sell weapons, what Congress should know, at what levels Congress should be involved, when the public should be informed, and what criteria should go into these decisions. And right now, it doesn't mention human rights as a criteria. It's implied maybe, but it's not there, and this would add that in there, which is a really significant improvement. It backs that up with some really important things. These are not as important to remember, but it's in some of the minutia. It requires the recipients of the weapons to also agree to honor human rights, and it requires that a bureau within the State Department called DRL, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, that their voice actually has to be heard. It's easy to criticize our government. There are actually good people within there. There are good people in the State Department and people charged with making sure human rights are honored. Their voice often is drowned out within the interagency process, and this would center that voice again in these decisions. So adding human rights criteria to the decisions is the first point that I want to put across about this bill. The second is around the Leahy law. Many of you have probably heard about this. This is Senator Leahy, who's retiring this year, has been a champion of practical ways to make sure that the U.S. engagement in the world is better for people around the world in so many different ways. The Leahy laws, when originally created, are designed to see if we are sending weapons or training to countries, the people receiving them, the units receiving them, if they have a pattern of human rights abuses, we shouldn't be providing them training and weapons. That's a pretty simple idea. It's actually a very strong law. Unfortunately, the way it's been implemented thus far has not been about weapons, but only about training. So it's been intentionally limited by the way the government and the executive branch has implemented the Leahy laws. This bill would change that. It would actually apply Leahy law to arms sales. So not just training, but actually the weapons. And it required that countries say where they're going to send, who they're going to give their weapons to internally, or have within the sale a designation of units that won't receive weapons. So it applies the Leahy law to arms sales, which is a second really big human rights value that would be improved by this legislation. There is then prohibitions on sales to countries where they've committed genocide or what we call war crimes, which is an important thing. We shouldn't be selling weapons to those places. It has in it remediation or accountability in that a country put on such a list if their government has adequately punished people directly involved, if they put in measures so it doesn't happen again, if they've made compensation to victims, then there is a mechanism for improvement for countries to get off of this list. But this is in the sort of the third way that I think this legislation is really important. It makes explicit that we won't sell weapons and provide security assistance to countries where there is genocide or war crimes. Then the last sort of basket, there's a basket of things I'm going to lump together in this legislation that I think are important for your members of Congress know what's going on, but ultimately, I think also for you as a member of the public. I think the change that has occurred, or the flags around arms sales that have been controversial, have been driven in many times by you, by us, by the public voice. And there are things in this legislation that will make it easier for Congress and for us to know what's going on. One is that when we transfer weapons, we're supposed to do end use monitoring, which means we're supposed to be tracking how they're used. That has come to mean, do we know where they are? Most end use monitoring that exists when it happens is going to a depot or asking the military, do you know where the weapons are, and can you potentially show me where they are? That is not actually monitoring their use. That's just monitoring where they are. What this legislation would do would say end use monitoring actually needs to talk about human rights and whether they're used for human rights. That is an important improvement in the processes, and it requires reporting on these things. It requires reporting on the risk assessments being done. It requires an inspector general's report, and it requires that sort of public accountability that you and I can see to talk about whether there are concerns going on. It also requires this is where I'm going to get into the weeds just very slightly a little bit. The way the arms happen today, right now, you will often hear about an arms sale when it's formally notified to Congress. And at that point, generally, there's 30 days for Congress to block a legislation. It requires that that process be followed regardless of the amount of money that the weapon or provision of assistance would cost for these countries where we have these concerns. Right now, Congress is only notified if they meet a threshold value. This would change that. It would say this country is a country of concern. If we're going to sell anything to them, Congress needs to be notified. It needs to have the possibility to block at the onset, at the start. Right now, there's a lot of missing transparency in what the government does because Congress is not notified. That's a really important addition to this. The other sort of related thing to that is that when we sell from our government to another government, you and I could find that out. It's put on a U.S. government website, says we want to sell weapons to a certain country. That's was in the past the primary way the United States sold weapons. Recently, I'd say in the last few decades, much more of our weapons is sold where a company goes and talks to another country and says, I can sell you this for this amount. It still requires a US government approval, but it's done through a process called direct commercial sales. Direct commercial sales get notified to Congress, but not in a transparent way to the public. Many members of Congress don't even know this is happening. What this legislation does, and this is really in the weeds, but it's important, and I'll get to that in a second, is it says for direct commercial sales for certain items, such as missiles, they need to be done not through direct commercial sales, but be treated as a foreign military sale so that the public is aware of that. Let me give you a few examples as to why this is important real fast. And let me know if I'm starting to run out of time. Just this month, the government notified Congress that they want to sell $1 billion worth of attack helicopters to Nigeria. I think there's already been some sessions on Nigeria. Within this sale is the requirement for some human rights training. But I think if we were paying more attention to human rights, and I imagine a number of you also are concerned about sending weapons to Nigeria, it just doesn't seem like that is what that country needs at this moment when its government is accused and seems to be perpetrating a number of human rights violations upon its citizens. This question of human rights would be heightened by having this legislation in existence. Countries like Nigeria, we would be able to put much greater scrutiny on. Some of you will remember last year in May, during the uprisings in Israel, we suddenly heard about this arms sale to Israel of joint direct attack munitions, essentially precision-guided munitions. This was done through the direct commercial sale process, and it was pretty alarming that Gregory Meeks, who should have been aware of this, said, I didn't even know this was happening. This was because this was done via direct commercial sale. If that sale had been done in a way that this bill will require so that it's public and in the open, a conversation about whether we wanted to be sending precision-guided munitions at a time when Israel was, in response, bombing parts of Gaza and Palestinian areas, we would have had a much greater transparency if this bill had been in place. When I talked about these threshold values, Some of you will remember in 2019, President Trump decided it was an emergency and we needed to send all these weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, where I think a number of us are very concerned about what's been happening in Yemen, where the Saudis have bombed civilian targets. They've extended that war. Luckily, right now, we are in a truce for another, I think, 45 days, and hopefully there can be a resolution to that awful conflict there. But there was a question as to whether this was actually an emergency, and the Inspector General did an audit and found that there had been over $11 billion worth of weapons delivered to the Saudis and the Emiratis that were never notified to Congress because they were below the notification threshold. If these countries had been on this list, if this legislation were in place, that couldn't have happened. There would have had to have been a notification because it would have been the amount of money for the sale would not have mattered. It would have been regardless of the money. Many of us are also concerned about the Philippines. There was a huge notification last year around the Philippines. Again, if human rights concerns were actually part of the center of how we do this, that would make it much easier for us to talk about, do we want arms going to the Philippines? Okay, I think I might be running out of time. Michael, let me know if I am. But I wanted to say why now is the moment.
Maybe 2 more minutes, Jeff.
Okay, I'll be quick. One is we are all aware of the war in Ukraine right now. I don't know how people on this call feel about the war, but one of the things that I'm seeing happening is a complete forgetting of what happened in Afghanistan last year and the concern we had then of weapons being left behind, being captured by others. We, in this rush to send weapons to Ukraine, we are moving to a moment of greater militarization. I think the United States is on path now to ramp up its production of weapons and to replace the ones that have been sent to Ukraine, to sell to Europe. In fact, we just put out $400 million so European countries could buy American weapons. European countries are militarizing. Germany is deciding to advance its military. All of this means that more weapons are about to be going out in the world. And if trends continue, it won't just be to Ukraine. It'll be to all these other countries where we have concerns. We need to have this legislation in place, seeing this trend, which I find very alarming out there. The second piece is this legislation has a chance. As I mentioned, it's led by the chairs of the two committees that are most important, but they need a kick, and you can provide that kick. One thing is they need if you can find a Republican who would co-sponsor this. This is about good governance and human rights. This is not a partisan legislation. If you can help bring someone along, there are people like me and many others who work in the arms control community who are waiting for a piece of legislation to get a kick, to move it along. And as that video and Jose talked about a bit, we need to tell your representatives when you meet with them, have the committee meet on this. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee needs to actually take up this legislation. They need to talk about it. They need to get Menendez to move it forward. Menendez, if he can find a Republican co-sponsor, is going to want to do that. We can make this move. And there are people like me and others who want to work with the ecumenical community to push this forward. So in recap, the Safeguard Act is going to put human rights at the center of arms control or arms trade decisions. It will require us not to send to places where there's genocide. It will make reporting and transparency much better for Congress and for us so that we can finally live up to our values in terms of the provision of weapons. I hope I did it. I started my clock late, so I think I ran over, but thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeff and Jose, for sharing your expertise with us. As you all have probably observed, these two bills are quite different. The domestic bill, the John R. Lewis Freedom to Vote Act, is a much more aspirational bill. And it is a bit of a challenge that there's no exact Senate match, but we decided really, in this case, this is what we want passed. And it's in that sense, it fits the prophetic nature of EAD to go in and call for these values to be implemented into future legislation, or for members of Congress, in this case the Senate, to affirm those values. And on the international side, again, a much more specific ask, in this case chosen precisely because we feel like it has a chance to move, although uphill battle, but because it does have both a Senate and a House version, as well as, although there's other similar bills out there, this one importantly does not have carve-outs for specific countries, and it has the support of both the chairman of the Senate and House Foreign Relations Committees. So That's the thinking, and it's a lot to absorb. And so encourage you to review the background documents tonight and tomorrow, which will be helpful for your meetings. And if you still have questions about either the two asks, feel free to message me through the Excel event platform. And either myself or someone from the Lobby Day Ask team will respond, or if needed, we can pose, if we're stumped, we can pose those questions to Jose or Jeff as well. But we want to pivot now to the logistics of our Lobby Day. And so let me introduce to you our wonderful Lobby Day coordinator, Tirsana Paudel, who has been working with the team to tirelessly set up and coordinate your Lobby Day visits tomorrow. Some of you may recognize Tirsana's name, as this is her third year working with EAD. The last couple years, she has served as our conference registrar and is a huge help on the back end of our events. So thank you, Tirsana, for all that you and your team did this year. And now please give us more information about the Lobby Day and our upcoming state breakout session.
Thank you, Mike, for your introduction, and thank you, Jose and Jeff, for all of your hard work, and other members of the leadership team as well on the Lobby Day team asks. Hello, my name is Tirsana, and I am the Lobby Day coordinator for this year's Ecumenical Advocacy Days conference. I would like to begin by thanking our conference organizers, speakers, moderators, and sponsors for putting together programs that educate and inspire us on issues that will later be reflected in our conversations with congressional offices. So, what is Lobby Day? So Lobby Day is a term used by organizations like EAD to designate select days when regular people like you and me meet with our elected officials and public servants to advocate for legislation regarding issues that we find important. And EAD is special in many, many ways. And one of the main highlights of this event is the opportunity to attend Hill meetings. They're interwoven into the framework of this conference to empower you, the constituents. We hope that you take all that you have learned during your time here and apply it to discussions with members of Congress in support of legislation that brings us closer to a society built on the values of equity, equality, justice, peace, human rights, and dignity for all. I cannot begin to describe what it means to us, the organizers, to have you all here at this conference, willing to lend your voices in support of legislation that aligns with our theme. Our official Lobby Day meetings will happen tomorrow, Wednesday, April 27th, and take place between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Meetings are scheduled with Senate offices this year by state, and they generally last 30 minutes, so it's important that they run as efficiently as possible. You will be given the opportunity to discuss the asks further, to assign roles and familiarize yourself with each other and other participants from your states in your separate state breakout sessions that are following this plenary. Attending your state and regional breakout sessions is mandatory if you are planning on joining a virtual Hill meeting. The breakout session will begin immediately after this plenary at 5 p.m. Eastern. The meetings will be held on the Excel Events platform unless otherwise indicated by your monitor. So these are the meetings that for Lobby Day, they will be held on the platform unless there are a couple of states with a couple of exceptions, and your monitor will walk you through all of them. We ask that everyone log into their designated Lobby Day meetings 15 minutes before it is scheduled to begin, and to be in touch with your monitor if you're experiencing any technical difficulties joining the meeting. After the meeting with your elected officials, we ask that you take 5 to 10 minutes to fill out a short survey regarding your visit. Your monitor will send that survey out in a follow-up email after the meeting as well. So for everyone who pre-registered for Lobby Day by the April 18th deadline, we worked extra hard to schedule meetings with senators and their staffers. As of today, we have 31 confirmed meetings across 22 states, including Arizona, Connecticut, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Virginia, Washington State, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. If you are a resident of one of these states, please join your respective state regional breakouts at 5 o'clock Eastern with your monitor to discuss meeting times and to finalize the structure of your lobby day meeting. Again, we only get 30 minutes with Senate offices, so we want to make sure that every minute of those 30 minutes count. If you did not hear your state called, I'm sorry to report that we were not able to confirm a meeting with either one of the senators. Not to worry though, we have set up a concurrent breakout session called Lobby Day Lounge, and it will occur at the same time as the state and breakouts will. And everyone who didn't hear a state but are interested in connecting with your elected officials outside of EAD as well, we recommend that you head over there. You can pull your resources off if you go to the Lobby Day info desk on the main lobby tab on your agenda. We have all the documents uploaded, and you can just attend the Lobby Day Lounge and have conversations with other participants and learn about the resources and information and all the other different ways that you can be in touch with your elected officials to encourage action on our asks. Before I turn the program back over to Jimmy, there are a couple of acknowledgments that I would like to make. I would like to thank my scheduling team who made all of these meetings possible. So Erin Hood with the National Advocacy Center, Sisters of the Good Shepherd, Elizabeth Corses with PCUSA, and Susie Tierney with Just Face Ministries. All of you have worked so very hard, and there aren't enough words to express how thankful I am that you guys were on my team. I would also like to express my appreciation to all of my monitors, who you will have the pleasure of meeting very, very soon, for dedicating their time and bright energy to the meetings. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you, the participants, for your presence and continued dedication to a shared dream of a safe, equitable, and just future. Lobby Day 2022 would not exist without your engagement and support, so thank you. Now, Jimmy will close out the session, and I will see everyone in the state breakouts.
And thank you, Tersana, for all of your hard work for making Lobby Day possible, because without you, we wouldn't be nearly as successful. Thank you. Wow, this has been quite a bit to digest, but information of vital importance. Thank you, Jeff, Jose, Mike, and Tersana for all of your hard work on these particularly important asks. As a reminder, the documents referenced are available to review on the www.advocacydays.org website as downloadable attachments for this session and on the Lobby Day Info Desk tab in the Cell Events lobby. Maggie and I will see you tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time when we welcome the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, for our Heal send-off. There are still more great workshops planned for tomorrow morning, following devotional time with Dr. Jesse Smith. The expo will be open to rack up some final points until we head out virtually for Lobby Day. It's time now to move on to our state breakouts. To join this next session, return to the Cell Events lobby, click on the Agenda tab, scroll down to the section on Lobby Day State Breakouts, select your state, and if you have not already done so, click on the bookmark feature to add it to your schedule. States will be listed in alphabetical order. If your state is not listed or you missed the deadline, select the last option, Lobby Day Lounge, to learn more about how you will participate. We look forward to seeing you, and thank you for being here today.